Deconverted man here with Dry Apologist. How's it going, Dry Apologist?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
I've attempted to throw humor at him, and it's not working. He is dry. I can't do anything about it. But I'm wet man for this interview or whatever we're doing. We're talking about epistemology and trying to sort out, how well that's the main core of the theist, non-theist debate, isn't it? The skeptic says, look, well, I want evidence, and then the Christian or the theist well, we've got this evidence. Like, no, that's not what I meant when I said evidence. And, here's this argument. And so I gave Dry my typical epistemology is the empirical evidence, repeatable test, or a valid and sound argument. And I said, well, let's talk about that. Maybe that will challenge both, the pesky skeptics on my channel and the atheists on my channel, as well as the theists out there, and really dig deep into how do we figure out anything about this world in the first place. So any thoughts on any of that, because you've had that sitting in front of you for a while there, Dry?
Yeah. So the three criteria that you have, empirical evidence, repeatable testing, and a valid and sound argument. So I definitely agree, an argument or reason for something has to be valid and sound. Empirical evidence and repeatable testing are desirable and in some cases necessary. I don't think that it's necessary for every conclusion to have empirical, at least depending upon what you mean by empirical, but empirical and repeatable testing. I think that if an argument is deductively sound without those criteria, then it can still be a persuasive argument. And also, again, it depends upon how you would apply those criteria as well. So that would be my thought is like, yeah, those are good criteria. I don't think that they're restrictive criteria. I think that you can, if you have a valid and sound argument, it doesn't have to be empirical or repeatable.
Yeah. This is, I haven't found an argument that isn't at some level supported by reality. So I hope that a valid and sound argument would always lead to a conclusion that's actually really true in reality. But being a skeptic, I kind of hedged my bet a little bit and go, well, yeah. But any one of those three would be fine. You don't have to have all three. One of the three would do it for me. Now, obviously, like I said, that there's something that the theist is maybe adding, or some other thing that I'm missing here, because I don't believe in God. I don't believe in the supernatural or paranormal or anything of that nature. These metaphysical, constructs of the mind, that's all they are to me, is just, God is like a meme, basically. So there's definitely some sort of disconnect going on between the atheist and the theist, or the skeptic and the theist, and that, one believes one thing and the other doesn't. So where do you think that lies? What is that we're doing differently?
Well, I think it depends upon the person. Like, from my perspective, I may find a philosophical argument, like the argument from contingency, for example, to be persuasive, but somebody else may not. And some of it comes down to intuition. Some of it comes down to what people have studied and objections they've studied and so on. So there's going to be different conclusions that people reach. I tend to not require as stringently, empirical, repeatable evidence for all claims. I know some non-religious tend to really need that. If it doesn't have empirical, repeatable evidence, then they discount that. I think that that's a mistake, but that's one of the divides. So I think different people have conflicting intuitions and kind of size up arguments differently.
Yeah, I've been doing, my thing where I just, list out and explain the logical fallacies of different arguments that have been presented on YouTube over time, and kind of running into the same. Here's a Kalam for the 20th time. Here's the moral argument again. All these arguments we've all heard. Contingency isn't one that comes up too often, but I think I've covered that at some point. And it's just recognizing the logical fallacy and then explaining it to somebody else. Many times they won't even agree that there's a logical fallacy in the argument. And I think that's going into what you're saying, where it's like maybe it's due to them not understanding logic fully, or maybe it's a matter of interpretation or intuition, or heck, it might even be a problem of natural language where they're seeing a word in a different way than I am, or something of that nature.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, like, for example, debates about free will. I mean, even theists will disagree on the topic of free will. And a lot of times it comes down to like both sides are making reasonable claims, but there's just a disagreement on a key premise. And different people are just going to perceive it differently. So I think that's part of it. And why that's the case is mysterious. I don't know why people come to different conclusions because I mean, certainly if somebody's arguing fallaciously, if they're intellectually honest, they should be able to see like, well, that's a fallacy, or that didn't logically work. But I mean, there are plausible arguments for a conclusion that you can say, yeah, that's all reasonable, but I think there's something wrong there. I tend to interpret, premise 2 to be less plausible than its denial, and so on. And at that point, I mean, people tend to just say we have different interpretations, but I don't know that all arguments are like that. It's just, I do think there is a level that people just perceive things differently. I guess is the most we can say to be charitable. We don't know. I mean, somebody could be lying, of course, but if I'm talking to somebody, we
don't want to assume that, right? Yeah, we don't know.
Right. I'm going to assume as long as they're sounding honest and consistent, I'm going to assume that, that's what they're being. I try to be honest, but I recognize, I put forth arguments, and somebody may say, I just don't accept that, and we may just have a different impression of the premises. So
now, when someone, you're calling yourself an apologist, so obviously you're taking a defensive position of the faith, of theology. I believe it, in your case, Christianity, if I'm not mistaken. Is that Catholic or Protestant or?
Yeah, I'm a Catholic Christian, yeah.
Okay. So, there's a particular defense of those ideas that's out there. There's more, of course, there's multiple argumentations out there. But when someone says evidence, and then the other person responds with an argument, there's an immediate disconnect, because I recognize that arguments are not evidence. And people will say something like, well, but an argument can have things in it that are evidence. It's like, great, then let's just focus on those things, because I asked for the evidence. So that's what I want. I don't need the argument at that point. I just need the compelling evidence. And I want to know what that is, because, for example, I deconverted in part because I looked for the archaeological evidence for the New Testament or the Old, and some of the Old, and I just didn't find anything that compelling. So maybe I missed something during that. Somebody out there somewhere might have that, and just for whatever reason is not presenting that, and instead relying on these, in my view, debunked arguments. And it's kind of odd. A disconnect there that I don't really know why that happens. And it's like, well, all I can do is keep saying, give me the thing. I want the evidence. Give it to me. Which is all I heard atheists ever ask when I was a theist, was show me the evidence. Give me prove it to me. What do you, I mean, that's obviously a thing you were talking, with a disconnect of terminology or perception. So what do you think is the core of that, or how is there a way to approach that we can meet somewhere, maybe in a compromise sort of negotiation way?
Yeah. I think oftentimes when evidence gets stated, really what it means, it's short for empirical evidence, and maybe that's not what you mean, but that's what it seems like oftentimes non-religious people mean. And I would agree, there's not a lot of universal empirical evidence. I think there is empirical evidence, but I think it's selective. Like if somebody witnessed something they believe is a miracle, that would be perhaps compelling empirical evidence for them. But I can understand if somebody wasn't there, that wouldn't, it's kind of hard to evaluate it. So, and even then, of course, there's interpretations of that evidence and so on. Evidence always has, different competing interpretations. And so, I mean, that's where I don't think that there is a lot of universal empirical evidence to confirm Christianity and theism, but that's where I go more with philosophical arguments, interpretations of, I'll just use philosophical arguments just as a general umbrella. I think that that's more universally accessible. So like you bring up archaeological evidence. I mean, I don't rest my belief on archaeological evidence at all. I mean, I'm not an expert at all in that. I don't know of any archaeological findings that support any tenet of Christianity. That's not to say that there's findings that disconfirm it, but it's just, I know there's a lot of events that aren't confirmed by the archaeology. I take a looser sort of view of what needs to be confirmed for the Bible. I don't interpret everything in the Old Testament as literal and so on, but yeah, I guess that just doesn't bother me if there's not archaeological evidence. So I take a more just general approach, like what can we, like when theists, for example, will put forth sort of scientific-based arguments like the fine-tuning argument or something like that, just doesn't persuade me much. So, arguments like that, I just don't, it's not to say it's bad, I just don't go that route. It just doesn't appeal to me because I can see where there are different interpretations. It's like, there are different explanations for the fine-tuning, and that just doesn't, I guess if it was rock solid, maybe I would use that argument, but I recognize that there are different competing interpretations. I'm just not drawn to that. So
yeah, because I was, because at first when I contacted you, I thought, well, we could do a debate, and I was like, no, I really want to get at the core of what causes the debate to take place in the first place. And if God was as obvious as the moon or something like that, these debates wouldn't be taking place. You would see something more akin to the if there was atheists, they would be more like the flat earthers out there, and they would be a totally different people. They wouldn't be the sort of people that I've interacted with or myself, because they're not, the flat earthers kind of poke holes at the explanations and make things up ad hoc. And everyone's like, no, look, you can shoot a laser across this lake and it won't bend, and it will go straight and you won't be able to hit the target. And there you go. There's some proof that it's a curve. It's like, oh, well, there's atmospheric, whatever, all this other thing that they'll add into it to explain it away. So the hidden, as they call it, the divine hiddenness is a pretty big problem for, I mean, I don't know if it always boils down to that, but I think that certainly does put a really good reason that people don't believe is if there's a God, it's utterly silent on the issue. It's not here to interrupt this call and say, hey, this is how I work, dude, Nimrods, just get it through your heads already. So it is, do you think that that's the big part of the problem, or do you think that there's some other thing? Because I've had theists tell me, well, I do believe, I just deny that I believe, and things like this. So,
okay.
I mean, what do you think I've been told, of course, look around and that's proof of God, and, or look out your window and things like this, and it's just like, that's all I see are trees. I don't see it. What are you talking about? So do you think that that's a huge issue, the divine hiddenness, as it's called, of God, that God itself could resolve this problem that we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely possible that people who don't believe in God there could be some resistance going on, but I don't think that, it's definitively like, yeah, you really do believe in God. You're just not consciously denying it, I don't think. But you could be innocent. I mean, it could just be that you just don't see the arguments the same way that I do, or maybe, and you could do that the other way around, that I just don't see it the way that you do. I don't know that. I can't enter your mind and say, oh, you're really denying God. I think only God can make that judgment. So yeah, I don't go that route and saying like, oh, well, you're really, like I can make this moral judgment of your evaluation of the evidence. I'll take, what you say at face value. And again, for whatever reason, we have different interpretations. It could be that one of us is dishonest. It could be, that we're just evaluating it differently. I don't know. And that's one of the mysteries. It's like when it comes to politics too, like why do rational people come to different conclusions? I mean, some political issues I'm just ignorant on, but then there are some that I'm like, I don't see how somebody could disagree on this, but they do. And I don't know why. But
yeah.
I do think certain assumptions will affect other assumptions. Like if somebody, for example, is an atheist, it makes sense why they wouldn't generally believe in an afterlife. But, there are more fundamental assumptions like, well, why would somebody hold to this? And that's where it's like, talking about epistemology, I consider myself to be a foundationalist. There are certain just self-evident claims that I think that everybody should be able to recognize are true, and then you build up from there. But then there are going to be people who deny those foundations too, and then it's kind of hard to move forward, or they'll deny the implications of the foundations, and that's where it gets into. But even some theists, like you brought up, those who would say like, well, you definitely believe in God, and I guess that tends to be like presuppositionalists, and I don't go that route. I think, I think that's a mistake. I mean, I get where they're coming from, but I think there are some serious flaws in that approach. So, but then the theists that'll argue for, like I said, like the fine tuning or intelligent design type arguments, I don't go that direction either, where it's like where it tries to be empirically grounded. I think that's mistaken too. I consider myself to be more of a classical apologist, where it's like looking at, again, like philosophical type arguments, things that could be in principle at least accessible to everybody. I'm going to give everybody the same grant. Everybody can reason and they're being honest. I'm going to just grant that and then say, well, let's go through the arguments. We may not reach the same conclusion, but we can all evaluate it and see where it takes us. But yeah, why people disagree, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's I had to, I don't know what you want to call it, intuition, or I don't know how I suspected that we'd be able to have a really civil exchange of ideas with each other. Who knows, how it could have gone. You could have wound up to be another G-man for all I know. But you're cheers above that level, so that's good. But yeah, I think we intuit things like that, where we go, okay, this person, I don't know why, but I'm gonna have a good talk with this person. And maybe it's just one of those hit and miss things where sometimes we remember the hits and forget the misses. So like, oh yeah, I remember when I was right about that, and I don't remember the times I was wrong, because that doesn't count.
Yeah.
So I think it might be that, especially with going back to the miracle thing, where I've asked, well, how would you even identify a miracle? I've asked that many times. I have a couple of different videos that deals with that, based on the definition of miracle, that I see it as impossible to identify, even if it was real, because you would never know that it was a miracle that you were observing without appealing to ignorance or personal incredulity. So, the unidentifiability of it makes it impossible to ever say, well, that's what it was. But the things that I suppose would qualify or count as something odd or extraordinary or some other word than miracle, I don't have any examples of those either, limbs regrowing or scars healing or teeth regrowing or, things like this that have, in a controlled test, laboratory sort of setting where we saw it happen and it was documented and, everything like that. It's just, that doesn't happen. And, so you would think it would at least once in all the time we've had the ability to do this, and yet it's not manifested yet. So I have to doubt miracles or anything like that until I have an example of even something that approaches that level. Is that fair, or am I being too needy with, being the wicked world is the one asking for signs and wonders or whatever, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you had mentioned the problem of hiddenness earlier. So yeah, I mean, certainly God is empirically hidden. I think there's reason to believe he exists, but yeah, I don't think that God works. I do think God works miracles, but I think that most of the time he's not working in miracles that are obvious, as you said, like, people's limbs aren't regrowing all the time, and certainly not in ways that we can do tests and demonstrate that for everybody. And, that's a difficulty. And that's where I don't rest my belief on evidence like that. I wouldn't expect somebody else to. And I think if you saw it, that would be good reason to believe, but I wouldn't put that as the criteria that everybody should be searching for that. Or if I'm talking to you or somebody, again, I've seen things that I think that's probably miraculous, but I can't prove that. And I certainly wouldn't be able to show you, what happened and so on. And you wouldn't necessarily interpret it as miraculous, but I guess there's a certain criteria. So like usually like the limb growing back example, a lot of non-religious will say, oh, well, that would be enough. But I've even heard some say, no, that wouldn't be enough. Like, they can come up with some explanation. But some religious people might say something like, well, they prayed for a parking spot and they got that. That's enough. Yeah, so it's like, where do you draw the line? And maybe it is.
Exactly, right. Well, there is the thing with the skeptic of that, if you got the limb regrowing, it would be something worth investigating. And then at that point, you would have more information about it, but you still wouldn't be able to say, well, that's proof of a different thing that I still don't have evidence for. So you would need that, that other thing. And so it would kind of go down the rabbit hole there. And I suppose because this being of God is so beyond everything that we've encountered in life, if it was to appear to the entire world, that would put a stop to a lot of things. It certainly would be compelling and worth investigating. But ultimately, I might think, well, maybe it's not a God. Maybe it's just a really powerful being. And if it was a God, or if it was a powerful being, it could read my mind and know what it would take to convince me. And then I wouldn't be able to tell the difference anyways. But at that point, I'd have to wonder why it cares what I think about it. At any rate, if it's so powerful, why would it care what I believe about it? But there's that kind of issue of where I think that's a bit far for the skepticism. I'll call it God at that point. I mean, the word doesn't have a special place for me in that sense. I'd be like, well, you might be Q from Star Trek, or you might be God, whatever. I don't care. You want to be called God? Fine, you're God, whatever. What's it matter to me? Whereas what I've always done or I've done a thought experiment where it's like, well, if it turns out to be a different God than what you expect, you might find yourself in a similar position where you're doubting that it's the real God, and you're saying, well, this is a test of the real God. It's right behind this figure, or something like that. So maybe we're both in the same boat, but of course we're not even at that point because God hasn't revealed itself in that way, if it's even a thing that can reveal itself in the first place. So we're back to the philosophical arguments and, back to kind of square one in that sense. But yeah, I do see that, I do understand that, some atheists will say, well, it wouldn't be enough in that. And I think that's why, is because the problem of identifying the thing as the thing is kind of a question in and of itself. Would it let you test it? Would it let you, probe it? Would, how, who knows, but if it did, then you could find out about it. You could learn about it, and you could maybe even come to understand it. But we're not even, that's all speculation. So we're not even at that point yet. So, but hey, let's start with the limerick going, and then we'll go from there. And we don't even have that. So what do we have? And what we have are basically arguments. I don't think that there's empirical evidence or a repeatable test of God itself, at least not the one that the Judeo-Christian God. Maybe a different God there might be, but this one seems to be presented, and maybe you have a different theology, but it's presented as an untestable entity that is also, not giving us the sort of, it's not visible like you and I are visible at any rate. So is that in line with your theology, or do you think that there is empirical testable thing about God that I'm just not aware of?
Well, I mean, God is a purely spiritual being. I mean, he doesn't have tangible parts that we could detect within the universe. He's the sustainer of the universe. So in some ways, it'd be like a cartoon character looking for the cartoonist. Like, they're not going to find them within the universe, but the cartoonist could draw a limb regrowing, or the cartoon characters could come up with, a philosophical argument for the cartoonist, is to be used as an analogy, I guess. But I guess just going back just for a minute on the limb regrowing, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't prove everything about God, but if you did see somebody praying to, a specific, the Christian God, and then that person's arm grew back, that would be pretty strong circumstantial evidence. I mean, it wouldn't be definitive proof, but I think somebody would be well within reason to then believe that that's the Christian God.
Right. So, exactly. Yeah. I mean, at that point, I wouldn't even necessarily call it belief. I'd say, well, we have evidence, so we don't even need to call it a belief at that point, because that's how I view the difference between the word faith and and fact. And maybe you disagree, and that's fine. But it's like, well, I don't. There's nothing about me holding this up where I have to say I have faith that this is a stuffed thing that's orange, that's weird. Because and neither do you, because it was right there. Now maybe you want to say, well, that was a clever camera trick, which if I knew how to do that, I don't think I'd be doing this channel. I'd be doing something cooler than this, but or I'd have it more often. I'd have other cool tricks, but then that's a different belief that you would then have to acquire to say that, to doubt it. Whereas the easiest thing is like, look, it's probably just a stuffed little toy that I have because I'm weird. And whatever this thing is that we're talking about that's called God is not like that. I can't. Here it is. It's in my hand. I can't show it. I can't test it. And so the only thing left is that valid and sound argument. And you mentioned one, and it's, from my perspective, I'll point out the logical fallacies. But at the end of the day, wouldn't you be forced to, because of the belief that you hold, to even if I convinced you that all the arguments you had were fallacious, that wouldn't necessarily vanish your faith, would it?
So I want to say one other thing about the empirical. So I got a lot of Christians will argue that like prophecies in the Bible, it would be a type of almost like empirical evidence, to say like, well, this is in the Old Testament, and then you see this. And again, I'm not saying that doesn't have objections, but that is the type of empirical evidence where you say, well, this was written beforehand, and then you see this, confirmed in the New Testament. So there is that, and I guess that could be argued as an empirical evidence. And I think there is some merit to that debate and discussion that can be hashed out depending upon the passages that are being discussed and looked at. But anyways, I wanted to throw that up for a second. But in regards to the arguments, okay.
We're having I'm having technical, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but I'm having technical things on your side. Can you go to the cam mic button down here and go to low resolution or low definition? Let's see if that helps at all, because you were kind of like
okay,
yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah, I think so, because it was really lagged. I don't know why. So can you go over that again?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so some Christians will argue that Old Testament prophecies being confirmed in the New Testament, or at least apparently being confirmed, it would be a type of empirical evidence. And again, there are objections and so on. I'm just laying that out there as that is a type of empirical argument that could also be made other than miracle. I mean, I guess that'd be a type of miracle would be the argument. But in regards to arguments, no, I mean, if you disproved definitively the arguments, and I consider there's a few arguments that I consider to be strong that convinced me of the Christian faith, if you could definitively show that they just failed, I mean, I would have to then not be a Christian anymore. Now, I don't think that just because I've thought about them a lot, I don't think that's going to happen. But in principle, if you could, again, I don't think it's going to happen, because I think what's probably going to happen is we would just have different impressions. I'm going to say, look, I find this persuasive, and you may say, well, I don't think you should, or maybe you'd be convinced. But no, in principle, I mean, I think that, or at least I mount my belief on what I consider to be the most reasonable conclusions. So, and just like in principle, if somebody could give me an argument that definitively disproved God or Christianity, a logical proof or empirical evidence, yeah, I would have to give up my Christian faith. So I don't look at it as divorced from reason. I just don't think it has to rest on empirical, tangible evidence. And I think that that's confirmed as well, like Jesus's statement to Thomas, like, you believe because you've seen, but, blessed are those who believe without seeing. And I don't think that what Jesus meant was blessed are those who believe for irrational reasons. I think he meant blessed are those who believe because they have reasons that don't need to be empirically confirmed. And that would be an interpretation. That's how I interpret that. So.
Yeah, I have a completely different view of that. I view that more of in a jaded way. It's like and it's weird. It's like you're blessed, but you're not as blessed as other. It's like, well, I didn't know there was levels of blessing. Wait a minute.
Yeah. Well, I think it means it's a better attitude. I don't think we should interpret at least as Jesus is saying, like he's not as like morally good, but it's more like it wasn't as maybe he was asking for too much. But yeah, there are different ways to interpret it.
There's nothing else I can do that's going to make it better on my side.
Am I still coming in funny, or?
Everyone else is fine. It's just me. I don't know what the hell is going on. Oh, well. It must be because the universe hates me. All right. Well, yeah, I think that we're definitely going to have to go over these arguments and sort them out at some point to see if I can successfully deconvert you, or you can convert me one way or the other. Because I mean, it's very refreshing to have somebody be intellectually, or try to be intellectually honest. I've always said my brother is a theist. He believes, but he has come to the conclusion that it is just a belief. It is not. He doesn't have an argument. He doesn't have anything for it. It's just pure faith, and he doesn't know why he can't just let it go. And I said, well, maybe your brain is just that way, and it would make sense. I mean, we both agree with, I would think, biological evolution. So of course, brains are going to be different. Some would be flexible where they can let a belief go, and some would be inflexible to where they couldn't let a belief go. And maybe there's some that could never have this particular belief, whatever that belief might be. And that makes perfect sense. I don't know how that's explained in theology, but I suppose it depends on what the doctrine is, or it's like, well, why would God make somebody that could never believe in God? It's like, well, sin? I don't know. Maybe it was a bet he lost with Satan. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to be explained, but
yeah, I mean, I do think that people's minds work differently, and I mean, under a Christian interpretation, it's going to be that or at least part of the explanation is going to be one person has a grace that another person doesn't. Now, some Christians will then go to interpret that to say, well, if you haven't received God's grace to then become a Christian, then you're not on the right path. And the Catholic faith doesn't look at it that way. It depends upon, again, what's one's inner disposition. So, and only God can judge that. So if somebody's a Christian, I don't think that means they're automatically going to heaven. If somebody's an atheist, I don't think that means they're automatically going to hell, and so on. It's how one's conscience, how one responds to what they perceive as true, and pursuing what's true. So I mean, I hope that everybody converts to Christianity and furthermore the Catholic Church, but just because they don't, again, it's how one responds to what's true. And I mean, I've definitely been in that position before, like you described your brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where I'm like, okay, I believe, but why exactly do I believe? And, should I then give up belief? And I think the arguments that convinced me, I think I always go back to those, and I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to give up belief, these arguments would have to go, and I've never been convinced out of them. So I think that somebody who believes, I think, subconsciously they recognize arguments like the ones that I find convincing, even though they wouldn't be able to spell them out. Because a lot of times when you press Christians, they might say, well, I don't have arguments, it's just faith. But then I've seen people press them, or they talk and they go, well, where do you think everything came from? Or look at all the design. Well, now they're appealing to arguments. So I think there are arguments. I don't think anybody believes something without some reason. I guess there could be somebody, but I think that's rational. I think everybody has reasons of some kind, even if maybe you can't spell them out. And I think when people give up beliefs, it's because they oftentimes come to see, well, those reasons don't seem to work, and these other reasons seem to be more compelling. And then, a lot of times, like atheists will put forth arguments, like you brought up the problem of hiddenness, or, the problem of evil gets brought up. And I mean, I recognize those are powerful arguments. I just don't find them as powerful as the arguments on the other side. And I think that an atheist could say, yeah, you're right, there are responses to those arguments, but you got to size up the argument. It's kind of like a seesaw. It's like, what's going to be stronger? I don't think a philosophical argument is definitive in that it's just going to, like you said, like knowing the moon. We can't really deny our senses, what our senses are telling us. Like the moon could be an illusion, but my experience of the moon can't be. I mean, I am experiencing the moon. I just can't deny that. And
yeah, it's all a hologram in the Red King's dream. And it's like we were going with the axioms where the a priori beliefs, reality is real. Okay, let's move on, and we have to just assert that there's, yes, you can do the thought experiment and run through that, and you hit the hard. I can never say the dang word. Sulfalism, however you want to say it. Sulfalism. You know what the word is.
Superlism?
No, that's not it.
No, I know it should.
I don't know how to say
solipsism.
I can't say words.
I think you're thinking of solipsism.
solipsism. There is that word. That's the word I was trying to say, but I can't say it. But anyways, you hit that, and you're like, oh well, now what? And it's like, well, let's just assert that it's real and move on, because you can't get anywhere with it, otherwise. And and then you go, okay, well, brains other than mine exist outside of mine. That seems reasonable, and and you build it from there, and it does seem rather empirical. And then there's some point where there's you run out of empirical, then you start to need these philosophical arguments or something like that to get to a place where you can believe in a deity. What's interesting to me is that you might be, correct me if I'm wrong, if you were actually convinced through logic, faith alone wouldn't be enough to sustain the faith, you don't think, for you?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, traditionally, Christianity has viewed itself as being based on reason. So, like, for example, if tomorrow they found Jesus's body, you'd have to give up the faith. If tomorrow somebody came up with an absolute, undeniable, deductive syllogism that shows God cannot exist. Now, some claim they have, but and I found that to be absolutely convincing, I would have to give up my faith. So I just haven't been persuaded. I don't think somebody's come forth with that. And that's where you get into debates like, well, let's examine the premises. So, I mean, I try to hold myself consistently in that regard. And then that's how I approach non-believers as well. And I approach other Christians that way as well. I don't, respect fideistic belief, or everybody's got their starting point, as we talked about. Why do some people reach certain conclusions? I don't know. But I try to hold myself and everybody else to the same standards of evidence. But in regards to those other sort of, I guess, basic beliefs, sometimes they're called like other minds, the external world, the existence of the past, so on. I mean, I actually think you can make strong arguments for those things. I think it is.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, sometimes they're taken as givens.
Yeah, they're the a priori beliefs. That's what they're called. And it's just kind of like, well, I mean, some of them at some point you have to just kind of assert that, you're done with it. It's like, oh, whatever. It's
right. Well, you can.
Yeah, you can. Right. There is an argument to be made, but if you keep peeling that onion, at some point you have to just say, well, that's good enough.
Right. In my view, it's gonna break down to a few axiomatic principles. And I think every good argument is going to rest on those axioms. So, like, in my view, the law of non-contradiction, at least with a certain application, and another principle, I guess I don't know how to call it, but like sort of a principle of probability. If something requires so much improbable circumstances to come together, there is a certain threshold or in a state, kind of like the limb growing back. Sure, it's logically possible that was just a freak accident that occurred, but like, yeah, but come on, like somebody's praying and then it happens right there. That's just so improbable that is just a genetic mutation, even though that's logically possible. It seems like that's pretty good evidence. But I would say that axiom, this law of probabilities, that's a really strong axiom. And to me, that type of axiom can be applied to things like other minds, the external world. To deny the external world or other minds, to me, you're going to end up violating that axiom. Now, I could be wrong on that. It's not something I've studied as much, but just my own reflection. It's like, well, it seems like it's going to be pretty irrational. Like, you're going to deny a fundamental principle that we all accept. But those fundamental principles I can't prove. I mean, I would say there's a few of them, the ones that I listed, maybe a few more, and I can't prove them. But if somebody denies them, I just think that's just ridiculous. I have talked to people who've denied things like that.
Last Thursdayism comes to mind.
Sorry, what was that?
Last Thursdayism, where everything was created last Thursday, and,
right?
Just the memory of it.
It's so improbable, and when we start, that's where you start calling something ad hoc. It's just like, okay, yeah, it's logically possible, but it conflicts with other axioms that we accept in other circumstances, that it can be dismissed on that grounds, or at least plausibly dismissed.
Yeah. I mean, let me run this one by you. Would you say, from your theology, does God change?
No, I don't think God changes. So I think God's immutable, but there are strong arguments that God would have to change to some degree. I'm not convinced by them, but like if somebody held my feet to the fire, like that wouldn't conflict with my beliefs. So it's not like something that I'm like, oh, it all rests on that. But like I am persuaded that God's immutability seems correct.
Okay, then given that, then my next follow-up is you're aware of the story in the Old Testament, Baal versus God, where the believers of Baal built an altar, and then the believers of Yahweh built their altar, and they did the ceremony to try to get them on fire, and the guy prays and bam, it's there. Well, if God doesn't change, then we should be able to do that test again today, then, right?
Well, that raises a number of questions. So, yeah, there were different interpretations of like the circumstances God performs miracles under. So, again, I'm not saying this is the most plausible approach, but some may argue that God only performs miracles for a specific prophet in time. So, like, I think it was Elijah or Elisha.
Yeah, Elijah, right.
Yeah, so they might say like, well, he was a special chosen man of God. There haven't been many of those, but he performed miracles specifically for him to demonstrate at that specific time. That might seem a little bit ad hoc in some ways, but it's an interpretation. I don't interpret everything in the Old Testament literally. I'm not saying that story didn't happen, but if you were to say, well, look, that's just incompatible with what could be true, I would say, okay, well, maybe that story didn't happen. I mean, that wouldn't conflict with my faith. Now, when we get to the New Testament, Jesus performs lots of miracles, and I accept that those happened. So, and in that case, I would say, well, that was a unique time. God is man on earth. That was a special prerogative. I mean, that he can perform miracles, and I wouldn't necessarily, it gets into the problem of hiddenness. Why does the problem also called the problem of selected miracles. Why does God perform miracles at some times and not others? And I try to address that some in my problem of evil and hiddenness video, which I think is where we got our conversation going.
Yeah, that's
so
that was really, we could have debated those things. And certainly I want to debate the best argument that you think you mentioned, the contingency one. I haven't interacted with that one a lot. I'd probably want you very different, but to have it in advance so I could analyze it and really assess it out. But at any rate, that we'll figure that out. That's funny, main gun. I'm getting distracted by the chat. Stop distracting me, chat. Bad. When I look that way, I have to look that way because my camera's flipped. But yeah, I mean that if we could, I asked that because it's like, well, here's something that would be demonstrably, repeatedly demonstratable. God doesn't change, therefore we can do this test. So let's do the test. But I don't want to say it this way, but I don't know how else to say it. We kind of know, now I'm assuming what you know, which is wrong, but we kind of know it wouldn't do anything, that nothing would happen if we did this test, that just, we'd be sitting there waiting, praying and calling down and nothing, it just wouldn't happen. Is that fair? I mean, I don't want to assume what you're thinking or know or believe, but it does seem like because you're so prepared to say, well, there's probably, explanation. It's like so am I right in thinking that you don't think anything would happen if we did that test today?
I think it's probably unlikely. Yeah. I mean, in scripture also talks about not putting God to the test, when Jesus is talking to Satan in the desert. So how to reconcile that then with that story of Elijah and the prophets, is that, there are different ways. And again, like I'm not committed to a certain interpretation of that story. But but yeah, I don't think trying to run empirical tests is the way. I mean, I look at it as disrespectful. I don't think it's the way to go. I mean, clearly the uniformity of nature is a fact about reality. I believe in miracles, but most miracles, at least if they occur, don't occur in ways that are obvious. So even most miracles I think occur would be miracles that are fairly regular, like God creating a soul or God forgiving somebody, or we can get into some Catholic, doctrines like transubstantiation. These are still set there's a regularity to those miracles. Like it's like the priest at this time does this, or when the sperm and egg come together, that's the moment when God creates the soul. Like these still have a regularity to them. But miracles that go outside of a regularity, like God grows a limb back, those clearly don't happen very often. If they happen at all, I think they sometimes do happen. Well, let's say they don't happen at all, ever. That wouldn't violate my faith. So my faith doesn't rest on that. I think they do probably happen. I think that there are enough stories about that they probably do happen. And again, I've seen things that I think are plausibly miracles of that sort. But again, I don't rest belief on that. But yeah, that gets into a big question.
I find that much more honest that you're saying. You basically kind of know nothing. It would be, we would do it, and it wouldn't be a waste of time because we would.
Well, I think it would be a waste of time. Yeah, I don't think God's going to conform to it. Yeah,
it's an honesty there, like with S.J. Thomason, who I've interacted with, where when I asked her that question, she's like, "Well, maybe," and I was like, "Oh,
yeah, it's possible. I mean, God, right? It's possible. I mean, we can't say and that would go even if it wasn't a miracle. There's the problem of induction, of course.
Right.
But,
the
uniformity.
So that if lightning hit, it would, we'd be safe from it.
Right. But uniformity of nature. I mean, it's going back to like an axiom. We can tell. We have enough examples that nature is pretty uniform, and enough people pray for things that we see. I wouldn't say the prayers aren't answered in some way, but they're not usually answered in a way that results in an obvious miracle.
So you're opposed to the prayer studies, then I would think then.
Yeah, I don't want to say that they're like blasphemous, but yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
Cool. Okay, let's see if chat has questions, because I told them to prepare questions for you as we wrap up here, because we've been going a while and it's storming outside. I'm worried that my internet will stop, and that will be weird. Just as we're about to figure out the entire answer to the universe, that's when that's when the call is gonna end, or whatever. We're just like, we're right there. Let's see. I said blocks. Yeah, come on. Where's my questions? Okay, here we go. I brought that up. So Bing Gun asks, if a miracle happens, how would we recognize it as such? And I had brought that up earlier. So do you have an answer for this, or?
Yeah, it comes down, I think, probabilities. So I don't know that we could definitively declare with 100% certainty, but again, like if you pray to the Christian God for somebody's arm to grow back in that moment, and then you see it happen,
that would be pretty darn convincing.
Yeah, to me, that the more reasonable conclusion is that's a miracle. But other circumstances, it becomes more questionable. So sure, it's a probability, but I think there are some circumstances when the probability seems so high that it's reasonable to conclude it's a miracle. So that would be the way I would answer that.
Okay.
And it's going to be subjective, but I think that we can make reasonable considerations.
Yeah. Wildheart wants to know if you were indoctrinated as a child, which you might be opposed to the word indoctrination. Were you brought up as Catholic? Might be a different way to say that.
Yeah, I was raised Catholic. I wouldn't say I was indoctrinated. I try to form beliefs on my own. I don't.
Sorry, I'm eating the word. Sorry.
No, you're a little bit off. I think you were eating my name at the. But
I'm sorry.
It's subjective. What does somebody mean by indoctrinated? I don't really care.
Were you raised as a Catholic? Okay.
Yeah, I was raised as a Catholic, but honestly, like I don't form beliefs based on what other people's beliefs are. I study on my own and talk to non-believers a lot, and I want to find out what's true. So now, is my psychology impacted on my upbringing? Yeah, in some ways, everybody's is though. So we could, who knows again what factors play into how somebody arrives at their beliefs. But that same question applies. We're all in the same boat. So was I indoctrinated? I wasn't. I don't think so. I don't. At least in the way you would think in some cases. So
yeah. When I described my Christianity, I said it was like an American Christianity where, it was just part of what we did. It wasn't like we always were talking about God every other day or whatever. So I would, not that I have anything to compare that against, because that was my experience. But, I would think that somebody that had been raised in like a more cult like group or whatever, where they would be talking about God or faith like all the time, I would, but again, it's the word indoctrination might be a little bit, depends how you view that word.
Right, it's a little bit loaded, so it depends on what they mean.
Possibly, but going with the most charitable interpretation of it is just, well, were you raised believing these things? And it's like, well, many people were. And I have a friend, Johnny, who they didn't have any God beliefs. They didn't talk about it growing up, so he just didn't encounter it till he was an adult. So as a result, he doesn't believe. So, well, that might have influenced him. It might have not. Who knows? Maybe he would turn out an atheist either way. Okay. Let's go with Nerdy. Why only one God and not many?
Mm-hmm. All right, sure. So, there'd be a couple of reasons for that. One, I think the argument from contingency arrives at the attributes of God. And if I accept that argument, it at least most plausibly arrives at only one God existing and not many. Again, that'll take its own discussion and debate, and I have a video on my site on that. And then if I'm a Christian, Christianity teaches monotheism, so it would be a derivation of accepting Christianity. So
yeah, when that would be a whole discussion. I thought of the Trinity as soon as that question. I was like, well, but there are three gods, but there's one, that whole thing, which I've had that explained even when I was a theist, and I still don't. I don't know.
Well, it's because it's not one God. It's not three gods. It's three persons.
It's three persons, but they're all called God. Yeah, it's really one of those weird ones to wrap your head around. Maybe we could have a longer talk about that. But that, I don't know. That might be more on your channel than mine, because that would be more to theism than.
Well, I had a debate on the Trinity on Modern Day Debate with Jim Majors. So
yeah, on whether
long discussion there
or not, or.
Sorry, what was that?
Like on whether it's actually even a biblical or not to have the Trinity.
Yeah, I was.
Some people don't even like the word Trinity. It's not in the Bible. Well, yeah, but the concept, whether that's in there or not.
Yeah, it was on that, and it was on whether it was coherent or not. So it was kind of a wide sweeping debate. But whether it's biblical and whether it makes sense. So.
Okay, last question. Here we go. Nerdy, what are some of the properties of God? Oh, there you go. That's an easy one. Oh my God.
Yeah, God's the fullness of being, so he has every property to its maximal, and that would take some explanation. But the traditional attributes, that he's spaceless, timeless, all powerful, all knowing, all loving, all morally good. All of that plus more. He's necessary. So again, that's its own discussion, but yeah.
I prefer the question I've asked. I've gotten different answers to, with what is God made out of? Of course, you could object to the question as being loaded, but I've gotten different answers for that one. But I think that the Bible doesn't really, or I don't know if any real holy book really explains how God works. works. Like, where does its power come from? How does that work? How is it a disembodied mind without a brain? How does that work? Because we only know about the mind as a result of the brain. So there's all these sort of questions that are completely unanswered or perhaps unanswerable. So there's always going to be a mystery. And it's odd to me because I see people. I just had somebody say, "Well, you believe the universe came from nothing." No, I don't have that belief. I don't know why people keep telling me what I believe. Ask me what I believe. I don't know what made or how the universe came. It's something about the cosmology, Big Bang stuff. I don't know, and it's beyond my field. I deal with informal logic, and I'm an amateur at that. So, ask a scientist. I don't know, but it's interesting that there's this idea of, I have all these beliefs because it's kind of a package deal with theism. So therefore, you as the atheist must have a similar thing. And it's like, no, not even close. you can't. The only thing you can say about the atheists share in common is we don't believe in God. Everything else is up for grabs, which is why I like the word skeptic better, because then people go, "Oh, okay, you're a skeptic. I got that." Like, yeah, I'm skeptical. And you're supposed to say of what? That's so I can do my joke, but you're not going to do it, are you?
All right, of what?
What you got? Hey, okay. That's why he's the dry apologist. All right, go ahead and plug away your channel, and I'll put all links in the description. And I thank you for this. I think hopefully it was interesting for people to talk a bit about epistemology and to try to get at the root of things. I don't know that we got there. We probably didn't, but that's okay. I had fun with it. So go ahead and plug away.
Sure. Yeah, I have a YouTube channel called Dry Apologist. I have a few videos uploaded with some philosophical arguments. Hope to make more in the future. We've done a number of debates I really enjoy. So anybody out there wants to debate or discuss, maybe we can set that up. So yeah, I'll have a debate coming up probably next week on Converse Contender's channel. So I'm on there a lot, and he has a upcoming channel. It just started, and he has a lot of debates and good content. So if anybody's interested in that channel, you can check that out. And yeah.
Now I'll make sure all those links appear in the description of this once it's on YouTube. So I'll poke you for those links in the other magical window that we have. And then the links will be on the Zelda, and Gannon will try to get the Triforce again. Wait. Nothing. I got nothing. I'm trying. I can't get him. He is dry. Throwing jokes at him, just nothing.
Yeah, that one escaped me. So.
That's all right. Link, Zelda, never.
Oh, I get it. Yeah, I'm familiar with Zelda. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for your time and energy, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Go check him out, and me and him will maybe figure out a debate at some point. Because I think that we could get a lot further than I've had with other debates. I just have that intuition. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. And my new goal is to make dry apologists laugh. That's my new goal in life. I'm going to reach that goal. We'll find the thing that will make him laugh and crack him. Blah, blah, blah. No, all right. Nothing. I mean, nothing. Okay. So I'm Deconverted Man. This has been Dry Apologist, and that's the end of the broadcast. Thanks, everybody. Whee! Okay, press a button, and that button, and